welcome to another episode of the Bible Speaks podcast. This is episode 18, and I am your co-host, Brian.
And I'm your other co-host, Daniel.
And in today's episode, we are going to be looking at an AP News article titled as Legal Gambling Surges. Some states want to teach teens about the risks. And I'm going to go ahead and let Daniel introduce the story for us.
Yeah, so our story today is about this recent trend in underage gambling in the United States and how one state now is requiring schools to provide gambling education to students, teaching them the potential dangers associated with it, and with other states beginning to follow suit.
You know, I just had this thought before we even get into this episode. I feel like this is the replacement for home ec. Like
gambling?
Schools teaching kids about the dangers of gambling. Like, we're going to do that instead of teaching you how to survive in real life.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
Yeah, that's... Anyway, Bible discussion topics are going to be the topics of stealing, addiction, false testimony, protecting children, and fiscal responsibility, which, I don't know, Daniel, I think you would agree that those topics go right in line with the overarching topic of gambling.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive in.
Let's dive in indeed. So our story today begins with a man named Nick from Atlantic City, New Jersey. When Nick was a senior in high school, he became quite good at making three-point jump shots, and he quickly learned that was a skill he could make some money on. So he and his gym classmates would actually bet on who could make the most baskets, making $5 or $10 bets. He said that, quote, "It gave a different dynamic to the day, a certain level of excitement. Little did I know how far it would continue to go. It wasn't long before Nick was gambling alarming amounts of money on sports. He hit rock bottom last year when he stole $35,000 from his job and lost it all gambling on international tennis and soccer matches, sports which he admitted he knows nothing about. All in all, Nick's gambling addiction has cost him over $700,000 over the last 10 years, as well as, you can imagine, pending criminal charges for stealing $35,000 from his job."
So Nick is no longer in high school then?
No, it was 10 years ago when he was in high school, so he's just like a little bit younger than me. And over the last 10 years, he's gambled and lost over $700,000.
That's I haven't even seen that much money.
I have not either. I don't know what it would be like to have that. I don't know how he managed to
lose that much.
What's that?
To lose that much?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty...
It's sad, that... I mean, obviously, he had an addiction, and that addiction even led to him stealing money from his job to feed his addiction,
Yeah. So let's get right into some of the Bible topics here. The first one being stealing. Like you just mentioned, he stole $35,000 from his job. I'm assuming he doesn't have that. Do we know if he still has that?
No, he got fired.
He got fired immediately.
Yeah, and his employer is the one who's pressing charges against him.
I was going to say they have to be suing, right? Because they got to get that money back.
Yeah, it was like a trading card like shop that he worked at.
Oh, a sports type facility?
I'm sure it was like sport, like baseball cards, but also like the other ones like Pokemon and like Yu-Gi-Oh. Not Yu-Gi-Oh.
There's a lot of money in sports cards, especially basketball, baseball. Yeah. I'm sure that's what he was, inclined to do because of his propensity towards athletics. Yeah. So let's talk about stealing a little bit. We don't know whether or not all of these underage gamblers are willfully funding or being funded by stealing from their jobs or even their parents. But we did want to address the topic of stealing, since with any addiction, stealing is often coupled with the quote-unquote need to acquire the substance of the addiction. So what is the first thing the Bible says about stealing? Well, Exodus 20:15. It's really, really simple. It says, "Do not steal."
That's kind of open to interpretation, don't you?
Yeah, that's wide interpretation. No, it is as plain as the text. There's really not much explanation needed for this verse. Don't steal. It's a command. It's one of the 10 commandments from God, and it is certainly in opposition to his morality, God's morality. So let's look at a couple other verses that just kind of hammer the point home. Matthew 15:19. "For from the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, sexual immoralities, thefts, false testimonies, and slander." And I bring up this passage because of the list that theft is included in. When you look at that list, you have murders, you have sexual immoralities, and you have stealing. So all of these things are obviously contrary to God's moral will, moral law. But what's interesting to me is as I read that passage, I understand that these things all have equal opposition to God's moral law.
Yeah.
I don't think we think about it like that. We think about, if I just steal something small, $10, it's no big deal. But no, it's right up in line with murders and sexual immoralities.
Mm-hmm. Which are things that we would think of as much worse than
heinous
stealing.
crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our justice system reflects that. The punishment for murder is much worse than stealing.
Yeah, much worse.
Yeah.
Can you imagine back in the Old Testament, you have a thief who's caught, and back then it was the law of eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth.
Yeah.
And if they caught you stealing, they would sometimes cut off your hand.
Mm-hmm.
That's how intense and severe we should understand stealing.
Is that still how it happens in the Middle East today, or is that just like a myth? Because I've heard that
it's not a myth. It's just not something that is widely practiced.
It's not super common.
No.
Okay.
Oh, you'd have a bunch of one-handed people walking around.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, you don't see that. Yeah, but that's again, it was something that was very old, ancient times.
Okay.
Yeah. Now we have jail. But anyway, continuing on, Ephesians 4:28, let the thief no longer steal. Instead, he is to do honest work with his own hands, so that he has something to share with anyone in need. And I bring up this passage in the context of stealing because I appreciated how this verse, using honestly common sense, brings up a resolution to theft, just to do honest work. Mm. And I also appreciated how this text goes beyond just telling people not to steal and to work for their wages, but it actually tells you about a benefit of earning honest wages, which is to be able to share with people in need.
That's such a blessing,
It's a huge blessing.
Help out people from like what God has given you to be able to do,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And
it's part of the responsibility of the church. If you belong to the church, your responsibility to the church is to help those in need.
Yeah.
Right, Jesus said they will know you by how you love one another.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally in the confines of the church.
Yeah.
So it's something that we, people who belong to the church, need to be practicing. When I was reading this verse, I kind of thought about, I don't know if you've ever seen those movies or television shows where you have like this mobster or this gangster, and they're making so much money because of their illegal, either gambling rings or their drug empire. Mm-hmm. And they have like this relative that is really goody two shoes and straight and narrow, and they're helping out the community.
Yeah.
They create some kind of community service, but once the bad guy gets caught by the law, all the money disappears, and now you have to, this charity is no longer something that is happening in the community. And I understand this is Hollywood's depiction of fantasy or whatever, but I thought about that. And I just thought, if these people were earning money honestly, then that would never happen, and all of these good things would never go away. Mm-hmm. But it's only because they're gaining illicit, funds that good things go away too.
Yeah.
So working with honest intentions and with our own hands has the added benefit of being able to help other people without the consequences of having that ripped away from us. So I think that's a really good cure, if you will, to stealing, and something the Bible makes clear is that we need to be willing to work in honest means. Romans 13:9 goes on to say the commandments: do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and any other commandment are summed up by this commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. And the reason that stealing is against God's morality is because it violates the second commandment, namely to love your neighbor as yourself. So when we steal from someone, we're not showing that we love them. Obviously, the person in the story, what was his name? Nick?
Nick, yeah.
Nick. Obviously, he doesn't have any love for his employer. Why would you? They're just somewhere you work. Mm-hmm. But I've heard other stories of people stealing from their spouses or their parents or other close relatives or close friends in order to acquire whatever it is that they're addicted to. And what they're showing is that they love the addiction more than they love the people. And so when we steal from individuals, we are revealing our true hearts in that we do not love those people.
That's so interesting the way you put that, because my knee-jerk reaction is, no, they don't love the addiction more than those, like their family. but really, like, their actions are showing that they do.
They do.
It's just, it's weird to say it like that, you know?
Yes.
Because I know, like, a lot of times when people are caught in addictions, like, they hate it, but they just can't stop.
Right.
You know? But, I mean, you're right. Their actions are showing that they
and what it is that they hate it because of it. This is maybe my opinion more than anything else, but when I find that people hate addiction, well, obviously it's the detrimental impact that whatever the addiction might have on their lives.
Yeah.
But it's also the fact that they're out of control and that society tells them that they're wrong.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think people would have a less adverse reaction to addiction. Like, okay, here's a good example of what I'm talking about. I love coffee. Do you love coffee?
Oh yeah.
Well,
I love caffeine.
Caffeine. Guess what? That's a drug.
Yeah.
Right, and we're all addicted.
Yeah, we are.
We are, and we go out and we spend stupid amounts of money getting coffee. Right, because here in America, Starbucks reigns, supreme when it comes to, chain coffee, and everybody's out there. I drive by a Starbucks at any given time of the day, and there's a line in the drive-thru.
Yep.
And each one of those coffees costs at least $5 or $6.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. But yet we spend our money to go get coffee. But society accepts coffee, and so we don't feel bad about it. Right? Yep. And so I think that's the difference, right? And then coffee doesn't have huge detrimental impact on the individual or on society as a whole, whereas gambling addictions and drug addictions and things like that have a much greater impact. But I think that addictions would have less guilt associated if society didn't condemn them. That's not me arguing that society shouldn't condemn addiction. I think it is a bad thing that we should condemn, but
yeah, most people get their morals from what society says is good or bad.
Yeah, people outside of the church get their morals from societal influence.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it does. It shows that we love the addiction, even if we feel guilty about it. We love the substance, if you will, more than the person. And this applies all the more to the closest relatives or parents, closest friends and family. How can we say that we love these people if we're willing to harm them for our own benefit? It's showing also that we love ourselves more than we love those other people.
Yeah.
And I can hear people already saying, maybe you're pushing back and saying, well, these people are addicted. They have a chemical dependency on these things. I say, yeah, that's probably true. But why are they not seeking help?
Yeah, there's plenty of options out there.
Well, at least here. I mean, there's other places where there's not. But in our context, right, there is a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It is hard. But I think that making excuses is not solving problems.
No, it's not.
No. And this may be one of those episodes where we get a lot of pushback, Daniel, because I'm coming down so hard on this. But I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Anyway, back to you, man.
Yeah, so moving on with their story, we have another example of how underage gambling can seriously affect someone's life in a negative way. And it comes to us from an Indiana University sophomore named Josh. While Josh was still in high school, he had to have what he called one of the hardest conversations of his life at that point and ask his parents for almost $900 to pay off the debt he had racked up from secretly betting on sports behind his parents' back. It wasn't long, though, before he had to have an even more difficult conversation, this time asking them for $3,000 for the same problem.
It's quite a hike.
That is quite a hike. After the second incident, Josh's parents hired a gambling counselor, so good on them for, trying to get their son some help there.
Yeah, intervening.
Yeah. They were constantly asking him about his gambling habits, and they kept painstakingly close tabs on his spending, or at least so they thought.
What do you think about, really quick, what do you think about that idea that if somebody or like, let's say a child, right? This is a good example of a child, having a addiction problem with their finances, do you think it's appropriate for parents to be able to monitor their finances?
Oh, 100%. If they're still a minor, I feel like they can do whatever they see as the most beneficial for their child.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then came the third ask, except this time with the admission that Josh had been lying to his parents for months and needed $8,000 to cover his gambling losses.
So it just kept getting progressively worse.
Progressively worse. He found ways to, sneak around and hide it from his parents because he was addicted, I would say this is a pretty bad case of addiction here.
Yeah.
Commenting on his story, Josh said, I just kept thinking I could keep betting and eventually win enough money to pay off my debts. Of course, it only got worse. It's a flawed way of thinking. Josh is among countless people under the legal age to gamble who have found a way to exploit state laws and place bets through offshore, unregulated, and online gaming sites. And he actually placed his first bet when he was only 14 years old.
That's the hard. So we had another episode about the Utah law on banning social media.
We did, yeah.
And we talked about, in that episode, the state is the one who wants to intervene and take kids out of, online interactions. And this is where I think, age 14, I still think personally is too young for kids to have their own free access to their own mobile devices.
Oh, well, at least like unfettered access, right? Like, would you be okay with if you had like parental blocks and stuff on there?
Yes, if I could have control, because I just there's studies out. I mean, we could go into this for a long time, but there's studies out there that talk about how 14-year-old brains are just not fully functioned.
Yeah, like I even came across that. It was, I think, from the American Gaming Association. Like they're in charge of like gambling and stuff in the country, and yeah, they were saying 18-year-olds' brains aren't fully formed yet. 20-year-olds' brains aren't fully formed yet.
No, I've even heard the staggering number that you have to be almost 35 years old for your brain to be fully formed and functional.
35, okay, because I read like they said 25 years old is when it like the frontal cortex is fully formed, but I was like, I feel like I've heard it way higher than that.
Yeah, maybe I added a digit from 2 to 3.
I know I've heard 35 before as well, though, so who knows?
I know there are a lot of bad decisions in college.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That was the point that they were making in the article. Like, this is why. And it was talking about addiction. They were saying how, like, if you can continue to take these huge risks and you keep coming out, like, okay, and your frontal cortex isn't fully formed yet, like, your amygdala, the risk part of your brain isn't fully formed, like, you're going to learn pretty quickly, oh, I can do this and get away with it. Nothing bad's going to happen.
Oh, yeah, no consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah, until there are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think just to kind of cap that off, I would say that as a parent, I would not give unfettered, unfiltered access to a 14-year-old to be able to do something like this.
Yeah, me neither. I think both of us know all too well how dangerous a place the internet is.
Yes.
And it's no place for a young person, at least unfiltered.
I just want to preface why we know that. I work in the technology industry. It's not because I've gone down that road.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to make, because you made it sound like, well, we know all too well.
Well, yeah, no, I wasn't saying it like a nefarious way. But
yeah,
like, anyone who's been on the internet knows it's not a nice place.
No, and I actually do know, because of my education and things, that it can get dark fast.
Oh yeah, I've heard some like horror stories, like the dark web and what it's used for and stuff.
Stay off of that if you're listening.
Yeah.
So,
moving on, there's a man by the name of Keith White. He is the executive director of the Problem Gambling Council, and he recently spoke to a group of 40 high school juniors in Virginia. He commented after speaking to them that every single one of them said either they bet or that their friends bet. Almost every single one of them had sports betting apps on their phones. Some were legal, some were not. He continued and said widespread gambling risk education could be comparable to the dramatic reduction in drunk driving deaths from when drinking and driving education became widespread. I thought that was quite interesting.
You remember
that comparison?
Were they doing this when you were in high school, where they would do the week before prom, and they would have the staged fatality accident because of drunk driving?
Oh, staged fatality. I don't know if they ever did that. I remember, though, like, it was the week before prom, and they really emphasized this. Like, you tried on the drunk goggles, and, like, they gave examples. They never did at least not that I can recall, the staged fatality.
We had this. It was the eeriest. Maybe it was too much for high schoolers. Because when I was in high school, I remember there was actually people that would walk around, and you'd be in class, and they would tap you on the shoulder, and you would be dead. And you would have to leave the classroom and go somewhere else that nobody knew where you were.
Interesting.
And then all the students, the teacher would obviously this was
it was like a scripted thing. Like, they got in an accident.
This person got in an accident. Okay. They're now dead. They're no longer with us. And it was it was hugely impactful.
I mean, obviously, because you still remember it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I could think like I don't know how you would compare that to gambling, but it was very impacting when you saw that happen.
Yeah, I mean, they could just give the examples like the two that I already gave.
Yeah,
the one kid who he'd lost over $11,000 and while he was still in high school. The other guy, $700,000, he stole $35,000 from his job. Like I feel like it would keep me from gambling. I don't know about everybody.
I don't think just being told would keep. I think the visual example.
You have to see it. Huh?
Yeah,
yeah.
But I'd be interested to see how they educate.
It's an interesting theory, right?
Yes.
Yeah. A woman by the name of I'm going to butcher this last name, Teresa Svinchek. I think
that's good.
Okay. She's a teacher at a Maryland school just outside of Washington, where many of her students are heavily into sports betting, as she puts it, and weekly poker games. She says they laugh at losing hundreds of dollars over the weekend. When I was their age, I was busy working to earn money, and losing what they lose over a weekend was what I made in a month.
Yeah.
I think these kids are the future tip of the iceberg.
Laughing over loss is actually a defense mechanism.
It is, yeah.
So I'm sure that they're at this age, that's all they can do.
And they already know, like, there's a problem.
They know that they've lost a significant amount of money, and all they can do is laugh about it because they don't want to face the reality of actually losing that money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Teen gambling can also take other forms, so-called loot boxes in online games, for example. They offer prizes to players, but they have to spend real money to get the rewards. Anyone who's played a game on their phone is probably familiar with this. All of them are trying to get you to spend money on the game in some way. And this can actually get children to normalize the idea of spending money to win something.
So it's interesting.
I've experienced this. I'm sure you have too, Brian, like the whole loot box thing.
Loot boxes, so there's a little bit of a difference between those two things. And just because I have a little bit of knowledge on that, I want to explain. So loot boxes they're in-game purchases that allow you. I mean, they're similar. They allow you to have certain.
You get like a package of stuff, right?
Package of things, oftentimes that will help you succeed in the game that you're playing.
Yeah.
Whereas the microtransactions that happen in games on the phone are much more what they call pay to play options. Yeah. And so one is pay to win, one is pay to play. Either way, you're paying. And
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and the industry has definitely began to normalize these microtransactions in order to continue to experience the game to the fullest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I've hated this I grew up when this, was happening, and I remember watching it happen and thinking to myself, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, now every game you play, like, there's in-game purchases.
Yeah, almost every, especially mobile games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rapid expansion of legalized sports betting in 33 states, with 3 more coming soon, has prompted state legislators to begin putting laws in place aimed at keeping children from gambling, including age confirmation and identity checks. And that's the basis of our story today. So
we want to talk about addiction in general, and especially how that applies to Scripture. I just want to right off the bat talk about sobriety, because sobriety is defined as refraining from the use of addictive substances. And while that is mostly related to actual substance like drugs or alcohol, I think that a substance can be defined as anything that changes the chemical balance of your brains. And when you talk about gambling, and especially the hype to win, you talk about endorphins, you talk about chemicals in the brain, that dopamine levels are raising.
Yeah.
All kinds of things are actually happening to the person while they're gambling. And so they actually do form a chemical dependency on gambling itself. So to me, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Daniel, but I actually consider gambling a substance at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because like I've gambled before, but I was wise about it and, decided before I even went in there, like, here's how much money I'm willing to lose. And after that, that's it.
Yes, I do want to put a disclaimer. I don't have this in my notes, but I do want to just throw this out there, and I think you would agree because of what you just said, is that gambling in and of itself is not sinful. No, so long as it's done in the same form that anybody would go out to see a movie or to, go out to eat. You have a set amount of money that you're willing to spend on something that is temporary, right? That is not going to last and is just maybe an escape from the realities of life for a little bit, you know. And so you like you said, you go with the mindset of I'm going to spend X amount of dollars. I have this money. It's exposable or not exposable. It's disposable. Yeah. I can get rid of it and I won't be upset.
Yeah, it won't affect my life in a great way if I no longer have this money.
Yeah. And so you go and you choose to do gambling instead of going out to eat or going to a movie or something like that.
Yeah. But I would agree that gambling is a substance in the same way that, and I think you will agree with this too, because I know you've done quite a bit of research on this, that like pornography can act the same way. Well, it's not like at least not today. It's not like a physical thing you have. The effects it has on your brain are the same as like hardcore drugs.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. And gambling actually has the same effect if you're letting it.
I figured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say letting it. If you have a propensity for addiction, people are inclined, by the way, by their genetic makeup, to be to have a propensity for being addicted to things. And if you have that, then this could be very dangerous for you, and it obviously has been for many people. So anyway, I just kind of get back to this. So sobriety is refraining from the use of addictive substances. Obviously, if you have an addictive personality, then gambling is something you probably should refrain from, as well as other forms of substance. But let me talk about some passages in the Bible that kind of discuss sobriety and addiction in general. 1 Corinthians 6:12. This is an argument that Paul is posing to the church in Corinth. Everything is permissible for me, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible for me, but I will not be mastered by anything. So this passage is not a declaration of permission, but a rebuke of behavior that was going on at the time. The Corinthian church was arguing that in Christ's freedom, everything was permissible for them. And this was based on the concept that because they were cleansed from sin, they were then allowed to do anything that they wanted. Yet Paul is offering correction in his responses by saying, no, not everything is beneficial, and no, I will not be mastered by anything. So even though the Christian stands forgiven through the blood of Christ, which we do, the Christian is also morally obligated to do that which is beneficial and pleasing to God. So what is beneficial? Beneficial refers to both individual and the kingdom as a whole. When we behave in a way that is contrary to the gospel, we are a detriment not only to ourselves, but also to our witness for Christ. So if our desire is to be like Christ, then our behavior needs to match that desire. Doing things contrary to the morality of God is not giving the honor due to the one who saved us on the cross. And although Christians stand forgiven, we are also not to be enslaved to sin or sinful behavior anymore. We are free in Christ and are no longer slaves to sin, but slaves to righteousness. So even though we are no longer condemned because we stand cleansed by the blood of Christ, we are still not supposed to be enslaved to the behavior from which Christ has saved us. Right? So even though the Corinthians were saying, oh, everything's permissible for me because I have the blood of Christ and I'm totally, forgiven. Paul's saying, yeah, but don't do that because you're literally going into the slavery of sin and you're doing things that are no longer beneficial for you. So you're using your freedom as an excuse to sin, which is contrary to what you say you believe.
Yeah.
Matthew 6:13 says, and do not bring us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This is a portion of the Lord's Prayer. Gambling is, at its root, temptation. The temptation of experiencing the thrill of winning is part of it. The temptation of experiencing the defeat of an opponent. And the temptation to become more wealthy. So these are all the temptations that are associated with gambling. Although many of these attributes also occur in athletics or sports or other means of competition, gambling is considered dangerous in that more often than not, it relies on chance instead of strategy or skill. What I mean by that is if you are out there on the field playing sports, you have skill and strategy to be able to help you win. Whereas in some forms of gambling, people would say the same thing, but in a lot of gambling, it's just literally left up to chance. If you go to a slot machine, you have no skill and you have no strategy on actually how to win that thing. It's a gamble. It's literally a gamble.
Yep.
So temptation comes into play when we have become addicted to gambling and can no longer easily decline that activity that is based on nothing but chance.
I was just going to say, like, the last time I gambled, I went in and I was like, $200. Like, you know, I can gamble $200 and it's no big deal. I lost all of it on slot machines.
Yeah, it's gone. And there was nothing you could do to change that.
No, there was. And when I first started, I feel like this was intentional too. When I first started, like, I was winning money. And then I kept betting.
Oh, yeah, they do that.
And then, before I know it, like, all the money's gone.
Doesn't that... I feel like it happens every single... I haven't gone to a casino in years. Probably because I got tired of losing money.
I only ever lose. I've never come away with more money than I started with.
So it's not appealing to us at all.
No.
Right? I would agree that whenever you sit down for the first time, you tend to win a few hands.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it just tanks, but you won. And so you're going, oh, I could do this again.
And like, I get the excitement, the rush. It's like, oh man, like that was cool. That was fun.
Yeah, it's a huge rush. Look at all that money I just won.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you got up and walked away, that would have been good.
Exactly. But no one ever does.
But nobody does that. And then you have the people that, like the outliers, that go, no, I won like $700. And I'm like, yeah, but how much did you lose before you won that $700?
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't count. What was it? Somebody told me this years ago. When you drive down the strip in Las Vegas, there's a reason those hotels have bright lights. Because you paid for it.
Oh, dude, I had the exact same thought. Like, when you drive down the strip, who do you think paid for all those giant, elaborate hotels?
You did. Yeah. That's what gambling is.
Yeah.
So if you think that you're going to win, just look at those buildings.
Exactly.
Yeah, and realize you're not. So, okay, Matthew 26:41. Stay awake and pray. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. Stay awake and pray so that you won't enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So this passage reveals that the natural inclination to fall into temptation. Christians may have reservations about their addictive behaviors. All too often, our sinful nature is overpowering those. So what I mean by that is we may look at a situation and say, you know, I don't want to do that. I think that's a bad idea. I want to be done with that. Kind of like we were talking about earlier. A lot of addicts kind of sit there and say, well, I know that's really bad and I don't want to do it anymore. But then our sinful nature and our flesh, as the Bible calls it, is more powerful than our brain, than our will, right? And so it takes over and it overpowers.
Before long, they're just like jonesing for it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we give into this temptation and proceed to commit sin against God. This is why Jesus was literally saying, you need to stay awake and pray through this temptation because you're going to fall. And if you know that story, they did fall.
This was when Jesus was praying in the garden, right? And he brought them with him. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that Peter denies Christ 3 times.
Yeah.
And so he fell into that temptation that Jesus was literally telling him to pray to not fall into. 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to bear it. And this is a verse that has too often been taken out of context, unfortunately. The way it is usually construed is God will never give you anything you can't handle. Well, I can tell you right now that sentiment is absurd. I mean, just look at the majority of the apostles and how they died, not to mention the impoverished believers around the world or the martyrs throughout history. These people all have things that they can't handle, right? They die.
Oh, you mean like their bodies couldn't handle it?
Right.
Okay. I didn't know people understood it that way. I always thought it like more like a mental thing, like more than you can't handle mentally.
No, the way that this has always been, I guess some people could take it that way, but I've always, literally every time I see that, it's like, oh, I'm being challenged, but oh, I know that God isn't giving me anything that I can't handle. What are you talking about? Yes, he is. People literally are starving to death who are Christian.
Yeah. That's
both mentally and physically.
That's true.
Yeah, harmful. So with that kind of clarity being said, this verse does refer to temptation. Specifically, that there will never be a temptation that comes up in our lives that we cannot overcome. And that's a powerful statement. So
I guess that's why I thought it was like mental, because I knew it had to do with temptation. So.
Well, yeah, because you knew the right way to understand that. Yeah, that's...
Praise God.
Yes. So keep in mind that I did not say cannot, rather than would not, or I did say cannot rather than would not. Although God graciously gives us the means to escape from our temptations, we are not always willing to do so. There is an active part that we have to play in order to escape temptation, and that is namely prayer. Refer back to the previous verse about staying up and praying because the flesh is weak. We need to be diligent in order to escape our temptations. We also should not place ourselves in circumstances that would compromise our ability to withstand temptation. So if someone is addicted to gambling, the worst place for you to go is a casino. Gambling websites are not good, as well as even hanging out with people who are addicted to gambling. Not a good idea if you are actively addicted.
It goes the same for like any sort of addiction, right? Like if someone has a problem with drugs, they shouldn't be hanging out with people who are doing drugs.
No, correct, yeah.
If you have a problem with alcohol, you shouldn't be around people that are drinking. Or
probably shouldn't even go to a bar.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Regarding being around people who cause us to compromise ourselves, another good reference verse is 1 Corinthians 15:33. Do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. So if you have every intention to abstain, but you're around people who have no intention to abstain, they're going to win out.
Yep.
I saw this physical or as a visual analogy. It was kind of neat. It was at a church congregation service, and this guy he puts a chair on the stage, and he stands up on the chair, and he says, "I'm going to stand on this high chair, and I'm going to take the high moral ground." And then he has a bunch of people come onto the stage with him, and he says, "I'm going to bring these people up because I'm on high moral ground, but they're all down there." And so he begins to try to take the hands of the people who are standing on the stage. And they pull him, and he tries to pull them, and guess who wins?
The people on the ground.
People on the stage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly I think that was a great visual representation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he fell, right? And that's what's going to happen. If you have a propensity to fall into the temptation of whatever these things might be, don't be around people who also have that same issue. Proverbs 25:28. Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit. A person who is unable to resist temptation and who has no self-control is like a city with no defenses. They become an easy target for invasion and plundering. Sometimes that person needs to spend more time away from the establishments that encourage ill behavior or pray more to keep themselves from stumbling. It may be more serious and they need help from others to build their defenses, gain fortifications against their addictions. Sometimes even intervention is necessary, where a person is forcibly removed from temptation for a time so that they can rebuild and recover. No matter what, a person with no defenses is an easy target for the wicked.
All right, so now we're going to move on in the story, and I wanted to dig into how this even became a problem in the first place, this issue of underage people in the U.S. making bets. And, getting into massive amounts of debts and stuff. And so it turns out it all goes back to something called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA. On June 26, 1991, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Patents, Copyrights, and Trademarks held public hearings on sports gambling. And it found that sports gambling is a national problem. The harms it inflicts are felt beyond the borders of those states that sanction it. In light of these findings, Congress exercised its authority under the Commerce Clause to enact the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA, as I will refer to it from here on out, in 1992. And just for clarity, the Commerce Clause states that the U.S. Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. PASPA was meant to define the legal status of sports betting throughout the U.S., and what it effectively did was outlaw sports betting nationwide with a few exceptions. Under PASPA, the sports lotteries conducted in Oregon, Delaware, and Montana were exempt, as well as the licensed sports pools in Nevada. I don't know why those were exempted.
Probably because they had long-standing establishments that did sports betting. Like Nevada is Las Vegas.
Yeah. That might be, but what's interesting is this next part. When they passed that law, Congress also provided a 1-year window of opportunity from the effective date of PASPA, which is going to be January 1st, 1993, for states which operated licensed casino gaming for the previous 10 years to pass laws permitting sports wagering. Oh, so maybe you're right. Those places already had sports betting, like a history of it in place.
Yeah, it was legal in those laws, in those states.
Yeah. So what that means is from January 1, 1993, they had the entire year, all the states did, to pass laws that would permit sports betting. And if they did not do it within that window, they would no longer have that opportunity and or be able to make it legal in their state.
Oh, so currently they cannot open that up.
Well, no, this law was eventually overturned a few years ago, which is why it's become such an issue. But this is just kind of getting into the background of it. This was passed in 91, or in 92, before the internet was like really a thing,
Right.
So then, of course, come the challenges to PASPA. There were a few before this, but this one in particular is what will eventually make it get to the Supreme Court. In 2011, New Jersey voters approved a state constitutional amendment that would permit sports gambling. The next year, the state legislature enacted what they called the Sports Wagering Act, which allowed sports wagering at casinos and racetracks in the state. Now, after passing that, New Jersey, of course, was challenged in court by the NCAA, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and the MLB in August of 2012. The leagues argued that the state's new law violated PASPA.
I wonder why they're concerned with people waging bets on their events.
I have to imagine that it's to their disadvantage if everyone can do it.
Somehow they're losing money.
Yeah. Because that's the only thing I could think of.
It makes you wonder, and I have no evidence for this, so maybe I shouldn't even say it, but it makes me wonder if there are certain ties to the states that currently allow it and these organizations.
Yeah, I think you're onto something.
Yeah.
The New Jersey argued that they knew that their new law likely violated PASPA, but that PASPA itself violated the 10th Amendment protection against what are known as anti-commandeering federal laws that basically stripped their power to regulate gambling laws in their own state. This is noteworthy because New Jersey had a law banning sports gambling in place before PASPA was enacted, and they failed to pass any new laws before the one-year carve-out expired in 1994. And then again, just for clarity, the 10th Amendment states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." So in layman's terms, what that means basically is if the Constitution does not guarantee explicitly a power or right to the federal government, it is left to the states to determine how that is played out. And sports betting would fall under that category.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that actually fall into that category. Things that we would be surprised about. This gets into a conversation about federalism, but sports betting is so off the radar that nobody in the federal government should actually care.
Yeah.
It's interesting to know. I don't know if this is widely known, but education actually falls outside of that realm as well.
Really?
But yeah, the reason that you have federal involvement in federal or the government involvement in the national education is not because of laws that allow them to do that, but because their funding keeps them, tied closely to each state. So because each state receives federal funding, the government gets to tell them what to do with it.
Yeah, it's like you won't get our funding if you don't follow these guidelines.
Yeah, but it's not because they actually have purview over the national education system.
Yeah. Another issue that would fall under this would be like the Roe versus Wade issue with abortion.
Yes.
It was very similar. Like they determined that this was a bad law because it does violate this issue, and then it
violates the 10th Amendment.
States. Yeah, it fell back to the states. Like they get to decide laws regarding abortion in their own states.
I had a lot of conversations with people that were very, very upset about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I kept telling them, obviously you and I, we profess on this podcast that we are believing Christians and we have strong views of things like abortion. But I was arguing on the 10th Amendment when I would talk to these people and say, I don't know what you're so upset about. This is actually how our Constitution was created and codified. And Roe v. Wade should have never been a federal mandate to begin with. It was a bad law to begin with based on the Constitution.
Even the people who passed it originally admitted, like, they knew it was bad law.
Yeah, so in the same breath, right, you have this gambling thing that has nothing to do with the federal government, and they should never have been able to pass anything that or restricted states from choosing whether or not they wanted to allow gambling.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, the District Court for New Jersey found in favor of the sports leagues, and they dismissed the state's claims regarding PASPA. So the state then appealed this decision, and on September 17th, 2013, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals found again in favor of the sports leagues, ruling that the state law violated PASPA and prohibited the state from enacting these laws. However, the appeals court also ruled that PASPA did not prevent New Jersey from repealing any existing laws it had. So that kind of allowed the wheels to move forward a little bit for New Jersey. It allowed them, now with their Governor Chris Christie's blessing, to pass a new law in 2014 that repealed the former law, which banned sports gambling. The four leagues and the NCAA filed suit against this new law, again arguing that it violated PASPA. So now you have the leagues going out of their way, like, to sue the state for repealing a law that bans sports betting. Again, like, it's interesting. I don't know why they were doing that.
When have you ever heard of private organizations arguing for the federal government?
That's a really good point.
That's insane. I didn't know this, and this is really blowing my mind.
Yeah. The leagues and the NCAA prevailed both in district court and in en banc decisions from the Third Circuit by August of 2016. And then New Jersey appealed this case all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And when they did that, they requested an examination of PASPA under the anti-commandeering provisions of the 10th Amendment, which then leads us to the Supreme Court case known as Murphy v. National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA. The Supreme Court accepted this case in June of 2017 and heard oral arguments in December of 2017. During this time, Governor Christie's term as governor expired, and then came on the next governor, Phil Murphy, which is why the case was therefore styled as Murphy v. NCAA. The court ruled in May of 2018 in a 7-2 decision that parts of PASPA were unconstitutional, and they commandeered power from the states, which is a violation of the 10th Amendment. And then, in a 6-3 decision, determined that the whole of PASPA was unconstitutional. And in the aftermath of the court's ruling, numerous states, including New Jersey, proceeded to establish legalized sports betting. So now we get to the effects of Murphy v. NCAA. A total of 36 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized sports gambling since 2018.
There must be a lot of revenue in online sports gambling, because 36 states to adopt something so quickly means that there's a lot of revenue, a lot of money being handed over.
Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 billion last year just in sports betting.
150 billion?
Billion, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Something a little bit more relevant to our story today, though, is that mobile sports betting is now legal in 26 states.
Wasn't there a ballot measure in California that just last election?
Yeah, there was two. There was two about. I know they were related to gambling. I'm not sure if they were both related to sports gambling.
I remember the issue for that being, it was a lot to do with the Native American tribes and the tribal casinos.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it passed. I don't pay attention.
I believe they both failed.
They both failed?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a public records request to the 36 states that allow the sports betting, and it was interesting that it yielded no disciplinary actions against the many unregulated operators or against teenagers and young adults who are not old enough to place bets. So they know these things are happening, and they're not doing anything about it. Well, at least not on a large scale. There's been like a handful of people that are running like these unregulated sites arrested, but it's not even enough to really make a dent.
There's no major laws coming out that are prohibiting.
No.
Yeah. That tells you that money is more important than people in this society.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and while there's no official tally on how many illegal sites are out there, Investigate TV found at least a dozen of them operating out of Antigua, Panama, and Europe. Bill Miller, he is the president and CEO of the American Gaming Association, said, "This illegal market is a concern for all of us. The offshore illegal websites don't care about age, they don't care about financial means, and they certainly don't care about whether or not someone is betting too much for too long." Regarding the betting restrictions that I mentioned earlier, it's actually a relatively easy task for young people to get around these. Many simply place wagers on their phones by using a parent or other relative's account, or by using these unregulated offshore betting sites that either don't require age checks or just don't even verify the age of the person who owns the account.
Call me a cynic, but I don't really find a lot of sincerity in Mr. Miller's statement. I think he's more concerned about the money going offshore, not into his bank account. But
do you think so?
Yeah, I do. Gambling is built on people losing their money.
Yeah, well, the American Gaming Association, to his credit, they do have like rules that they put in place to where like they will cut people off, but obviously it's still possible for people to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And now all that money is going to other people.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like it's coming out of, it's not going into their pocket,
right?
And it's upsetting them.
So they're appealing to moral,
Yeah.
Hey, this is wrong. We shouldn't allow. Anyway, I'll get over that. All right, so let's talk about false testimony because of the people that are doing these types of gamblings without being totally honest about who they are. When I talk about false testimony, I think it's important to understand that this is, again, we talked about this in I think several other episodes where we discuss lying. False testimony doesn't have to do with lying in general, but has to do about legal issues, right? It's a legal matter, and it's giving false testimony in regards to legal statements about either oneself or about others. So with that in mind, let's just look at a few passages. Proverbs 19:9, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who tells lies will all perish. The main issue in this story is that young people, for whom it is illegal to gamble, are lying about their age in order to gamble. And I thought about this for a long time, and I'm going to interject a bit of my opinion here, so bear with me. There's a story, I don't know if you, Daniel, you might have heard stories about this. I've heard many stories where people during World War II were actually joining the military underage. They were lying about their age, and they were joining the military in order to serve their country.
My grandpa actually joined underage. I believe he had his parents' consent, but he joined the Marines when he was 15.
15 years old.
Yeah.
And back then, parental consent was enough.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, but there are other stories where people no, I'm old enough.
Yeah, they would just lie, like, no, I'm 18.
Yeah.
And they were like 14.
Yeah, and they went in, to fight for their country. There are professions where lying about one's identity is required to stop a threat or prevent a serious crime from happening. Think undercover law enforcement. The difference between my two examples above and lying about one's age in order to gamble is that my examples are selfless acts aimed at the greater good of the whole of society, whereas lying to gamble is entirely self-serving. We did do a previous episode on, I believe it was ChatGPT, where we talked about the morality of technology. For a bit more explanation as to why I believe the Bible supports this rationale about the amorality of technology, I do encourage you guys to go check out that episode. But my point is this: when the motive is selfless and serving the greater moral good, disguising our identity is actually permissible. There's several examples in Scripture that point to that. And again, I encourage you guys to go check out the episode on ChatGPT to hear about some of those examples. But when the motive is entirely selfish, we sin when we deceive others to their own detriment, and oftentimes our own detriment as well. So I just wanted to point that out because that really matters when we consider whether or not these people lying is of accord to God's morality. Romans 13:1 says this: every person is to be in subjection to the governing authority. So this is another issue about lying about who you are. This is a passage we continually come back to since its meaning is very plain in many of our episodes. If the governing authorities have passed a law that states a person is required to be of a certain age to gamble, then the authority is to be upheld. Obviously, if that governing authority makes law that violates God's law, the Christian is no longer to observe that law. But until that happens, the law of the land is to be upheld by believing Christians. Since gambling serves nobody but self, and only then on occasion, because oftentimes people are doing gambling to their own detriment, and that law states that a person must be of a certain age before they partake in that activity, then God's moral standard is to abide by the law and wait until the legal time to do so. I suppose now it is a good time to state that there is no specific passage about gambling being sinful in Scripture. We talked about that a little bit earlier. I'll just suffice to say that gambling in and of itself is not a sin before God. Once again, at least He has not clearly revealed that to us in His Word.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that people should gamble if it's illegal for them to do so.
Yeah, and then just to give some background to that, I looked into the gambling ages in the different states, and they're all different. We live in California. California's legal gambling age is 18, just across the board. There's also several different types of gambling that the states set ages for. So there's lottery, which is considered
Is it 18?
Gambling.
That must have changed.
Well, it's 18, but then for casinos, it varies. Some of them are 21, some of them are 18.
Yeah, so the ones that are 18 are the Native American.
They are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they haven't all agreed yet, I guess, to up the age.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Because I thought you couldn't gamble in a quote unquote legal casino. They're not legal or illegal. They're just not on tribal land, right? If you can't in a US regulated casino, you can't gamble until you're 21 in California.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, so they're all in California. It's 18 across the board, and there's the lottery, there's casino gambling. I can't remember the name. It's a French term, but basically it's pool betting. If you have a lottery pool at work or a pool at work on the Super Bowl or whatever, it's legal to do in California if you're 18. And even bingo is considered gambling because
you can't play bingo until you're 18.
Well, you can't bet on it.
You can't bet on it.
Yeah, but then there are other states where I think it was Texas. They allow 16-year-olds to gamble at bingo with parental consent.
Really? Well, yeah. Texas allows you to drink too with parental consent underage.
Do they?
Yeah, I
didn't know that.
I don't even think last time I checked, Texas did not have a underage limit. If the alcohol was purchased for you by your parent.
Interesting.
Yeah, so if you're at a restaurant and you're 14, your parent can buy you alcohol.
Oh, even at a restaurant?
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then there were other states where they weren't all the same. For the lottery, they said you could be 18. For the pool betting, they said you could be 17. But then for casinos, you had to be 21. Some of them were 21 across the board. Some of them don't even allow casinos, and the only sort of casino betting is on cruise ships and stuff, and they have laws for that.
Yeah, and cruise ships are different because they're in international waters.
If they're far enough out, but
right.
If they're within the boundary or whatever, they fall under that state's.
Oh yeah, law. If you're on a riverboat in Mississippi,
yeah,
and you're on, you still can't.
Yeah. So the gambling ages, those are left up to the states, and yeah, they're all different. So, I guess if you are interested, if you are of legal age to do so and wish to be subject to your governing authorities, you can look into that. It's pretty easy to find. So getting back to the effects of that Supreme Court case, Murphy v. NCAA, federal agents are actually warning that a lot of these sites serve as a funding source for other illegal activities, including drug trading and human trafficking. So something to keep in mind if this is, something that you're considering or that you find yourself stuck in, the money that these sites take in is going to some pretty nefarious activities.
Is that the majority, or is that just some? Do we know?
I couldn't find specifics. I get the feeling that there was an actual FBI agent who was like, they interviewed in the article I was reading on this, and I could tell like he didn't want to give too many specifics because it's an ongoing investigation.
Sure.
Yeah. Honestly, I hope that it's the minority.
Yeah, the outliers.
You know, but the way the world is today, I don't know. I did some digging on these illegal sites, actually. And I found that many of them, they function basically as like an online bookie. So what happens is bets are placed through a network of students, friends, acquaintances. They serve as the bookies and the agents who recruit underage bettors. And then they go around and collect wagers and distribute winnings. But then there's the backers. The backers, their identities are normally not known to the bookies, if you will, or the underage gamblers. What they do is they pay the subscriptions to these illegal sites and pass out access codes to the students on the sites or places where they're needed. And they also front the money to cover the winnings. But more dangerously, they allow the gamblers to bet on credit. That's how those kids were getting in thousands of dollars of debt. They didn't actually have the money. They just thought they could win.
Oh, so there would have been no reflection in any of their financial accounts.
I think that's how that kid got to like the $8,000 behind his parents' back.
I was really wondering how that happened, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he was betting on credit, like fake credit. You know, they're just saying, "Yeah, we'll let you get into that much debt with us."
Yeah, that's crazy. I know with the California lottery, probably the national lottery, you cannot buy a lottery ticket with a credit card.
Is that right?
Yeah, you have to pay cash.
I feel like I've used a credit card to buy a lottery ticket before.
I promise you have not. Okay. Not, at least not here in California.
Maybe I paid cash. I don't know.
Maybe you're using your debit card.
Maybe, huh?
Yeah.
Who exactly is behind many of these offshore sites is so veiled that it's hard to figure out who's actually operating them or how they pick their targets. Many of these sites don't have any protections at all in place to guarantee that the person betting is, one, actually of legal age to do so, or two, that their winnings will actually be paid.
Really? There's no guarantee?
No guarantee. Yeah, so it's just all around, like, this is just a bad idea. Please don't do it.
Yeah, even if you win, if you're not guaranteed to pay, why would you even do that?
Right? I mean, because you're addicted, and this is something that will feed your addiction.
Yeah,
right?
True. 100%.
I was actually reading more about these, and there were some examples of kids in high school being recruited as these bookies by these illegal like backers of these offshore sites.
That's how drug deals work.
Yeah, it is, huh?
Yeah, exactly. The same thing. They recruit these young people that can, encourage other young people to do things that are going to cause them to get addicted. They want addiction.
They do, yeah. That's how they make their money. Approximately 69% of college students nationwide bet on sports in the past year, according to the Gaming Council. The International Center for Responsible Gaming estimates that 6% of U.S. college students have a gambling problem serious enough to cause psychological difficulties, unmanageable debt, and failing grades. And then by comparison, only 1% of adults are problem gamblers.
Yeah, because kids are so much more... I call them kids. These people... And we'll go back to the whole brain, issue.
Exactly, yeah.
These people who have brains that are still forming are so much more susceptible to addictive substances.
Because the risk center of their brain is not fully formed yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why insurance rates are so high for young people, for cars.
Yeah.
Because they don't comprehend risks as well as they will eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the American Gaming Association, they estimate that in 2021, Americans spent about $148 billion placing bets on sports. So I was right, about the $150 billion range. But what's really interesting is that more than 40% of those bets were illegal.
40%?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's $63 billion wagered by Americans too young to bet or through these unlicensed gambling outfits.
And the scariest part to me is that $63 billion doesn't actually mean that they had that $63 billion, but they could borrow it.
Yeah, scary, right?
Very scary.
So in case you're unfamiliar, I already talked about this a little bit, but I'll go ahead and just read it again here through my notes. In most states, the gambling age is set at 18. Some are set at 21. And then there's a handful that allow 16-year-olds to gamble if they have parental consent. Oh, yeah, and then there was a couple that also allow 16-year-olds to gamble if they're part of a native tribe.
Oh, if they're actually part of the tribe.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which, at first, I thought about it. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, you know, they're being nice in that way. But then I was like, is it really nice to let 16-year-olds gamble with, like, no one restricting it?
It almost feels like you're preying on your own people.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's my first thought.
Yeah, knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Some also have different requirements for different types of gambling. I already mentioned this, but some states allow 18-year-olds to buy lottery tickets, but also require people to be 21 or older in order to gamble in a casino. Getting back to our story, there are now states that are passing laws requiring schools to have gambling education in school. So Virginia enacted a law last year requiring schools to have classes on gambling and its addictive potential. The State Board of Education is still formulating the curriculum for that education, and they have to get it cleared for use by the state government before lessons can begin. I tried to look into what exactly they were trying to do, and I couldn't find anything.
Nothing on easy record?
No. Yeah. And then there's also 2 states that currently have bills pending in their legislatures to create these same such classes, and those states are New Jersey and Michigan. Maryland and West Virginia have also they've tried passing legislation similar to this recently, but they've been unsuccessful so far. I don't even believe they've made it to I think one of them made it to a state vote and failed, and the other one didn't even make it to a state vote. And then there's also a congressional effort to enable the Department of Justice to have more tools at its disposal to shut down illegal gaming sites. United States Representative Dina Titus, she is the Democratic co-chair of the Congressional Gaming Caucus. She wrote to the Justice Department last summer asking for a concerted effort to stop what she called a thriving and unfettered illegal market. They pointed out in that letter that offshore sites in particular target and exploit children and young adults.
All right, so that brings us to this concept of protecting children, and this obviously I think it's an epidemic, at least here in the United States. This concept of online gambling, $150 billion is a lot of money, and the fact that 63% of that is children.
63 billion, 40%.
40% is children. $63 billion is children.
Well, 40% was illegal, so either underage or through an illegal site.
Oh, so it could have been adults going through illegal sites.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's good clarity. Still, though, children are being targeted.
They are, yeah.
So I want to
just real quick side note. Some of those illegal sites, I was reading that, like, they're literally targeting students at schools in the Big Ten,
colleges.
The colleges, yeah. And that U.S. representative, like, she's looked at these sites and she was saying, like, I can see, like, they literally make them appealing to young people. They're targeted to young people.
Their advertisements and I think even their pages. When you go to their pages, they're very interactive and they're very
That's what she was saying. She was saying the same thing.
That's in line with like e-cigarettes and vaping. I think I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's crazy to think about the fact that we even need to protect our children from things like this. But it's the reality of our society and our technology today.
Yeah, anywhere there's a buck to be made.
Somebody will try to make it.
Yeah.
So let's look at some biblical passages that talk about children in general. Psalm 127:3, sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord, offspring and a reward. So children, I mean, this has been brought up in another episode as well, but of our podcast. But children are a blessing from God and should be protected since they have great value. We as Christians really need to take that to heart, if you will. These kids, these children of ours, and even if they're not your direct children, if they're children within the congregation, within the church, they're our responsibility. And so when we think about the fact that ads are targeting children for nefarious gain, it is our responsibility as parents and as church members to protect our children, because they are a blessing and a reward from God. We should take that very seriously. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Start a youth out on his way. Even when he grows old, he will not depart from it." So allowing children to be raised by marketing campaigns is neglecting the responsibility of parents to raise a child in the way that they should go. And this applies again to the church as a whole. This can be applicable to more than gambling, but is appropriate to bring up here as well. Marketing campaigns targeting children are rampant in our world today, and parents need to be all the more diligent in raising their children in our current world. I mean, I don't know how it is in other states, but in California, especially when you go down to like, downtown Los Angeles or heavily populated areas, you have a lot of even just billboards. Kids driving through in their cars, looking up at the sky, and they see these giant billboards advertising all kinds of gambling sites. And
oh yeah, I see a lot advertising like marijuana dispensaries, and a lot of those too are actually illegal. They don't have the proper permits, but they still advertise.
I've even seen pornography and
like gentlemen's club, like
quote unquote gentlemen's clubs, right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is it's out there and people can see it, and then you go to the gaming sites that kids are on. You think it's innocent. It's some little puzzle game on their phones, but then you have ads that pop up every once in a while, or all the time actually. And these ads are colorful, and they're making all kinds of fun noises, and they're very bright and flashy lights, and kids are going to be interested and compelled to look at these things.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Brian.
Yeah.
We may or may not have time for it in this episode, but we'll see. You said that allowing our kids to be raised by marketing campaigns is neglecting our responsibilities as parents. I was just wondering, do you think that this may be getting off into the weeds, so we don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but do you think that sending kids to public school could be looked at in the same way? I know a lot of Christians specifically feel that way, that being raised in the public school system with the values they teach, it's a violation of this verse. It's neglecting their duty. So
a huge topic.
It is a huge topic. It just popped in my head. If we don't have time, we don't have time.
Well, that may be another episode. I would just say that I think it's a tough call, and I don't want to make a blanket statement, because I think a lot of people, even people within the church, they can't afford private education.
Yeah, they can't afford, or even just to have one parent stay home and homeschool, they just can't afford it.
And especially in the coasts, right?
It's expensive.
New York, California, it's so expensive to live that you have to have double income. Mm-hmm. I think, what is it? I just read a thing maybe a few months ago that said the middle class in California was, you have to have a household income of $130,000 annually. That's middle class.
Is that middle class or upper middle class?
No, that was middle class.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. Right. So yeah. So to say that, you're not being a responsible Christian by sending your child to public school, I think is a little bit out. There's so much context there.
There is, yeah.
That it's not a fair statement.
Yeah.
Right. And I would never tell somebody that they're not being a good Christian by sending their child to public school.
Yeah.
I think if you have the means and the ability to keep a child out of public education at this time in our society, I would encourage you to do that. But I'm not going to say at all that you're being a bad Christian for not being able to do that.
Yeah, I feel the same way, because every time I hear people bringing that up, I'm just it rubs me the wrong way, because of that issue. Not everyone can afford to do that, and it's a huge blessing if you can.
Yeah, and I do believe that if children are in public education, and not just because of what's being taught, but because of the influences of even your peers as a student in a public educated sector. Not everybody there is going to be a Christian. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be all the more diligent as a parent and as a member of the church. See, I personally believe that it is the full responsibility of the church to raise the children in the church, rather than just the parent. I think it really does take a village.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a great diligence in raising a child in the way that they should go. in order to keep them from the influences of the world. Or at least to be able to combat not to keep them away from it, but to combat it when it comes up.
Yeah, like you can look at it as a mission field and, train your child up to, view it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot more to be said about that. Maybe we should look at maybe doing an episode on public education. Who knows? That would be probably our most controversial episode, I think.
You think so?
It would be up there.
More than women in ministry?
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, we'll another time.
Okay.
Matthew 18:6, and I think this is a good warning for everybody. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to fall away, it would be better for him if a heavy millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea. That is I would even call that a violent passage.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That's a pretty bad way to go.
It's a horrible way to go.
Giant rock hung around your neck and then plunged into the ocean.
Yeah, and that would be preferable to the outcome if you cause a young person to fall away. That would be the preferable outcome.
Yeah.
So I add this passage more because it highlights the detriment of those who would lead children down the path of addiction, or any worldly danger for that matter, and helps us who desire to raise children to be mindful of the dangers that are present in the world around us. We are warned that there will be those who are targeting our children in this passage. And so we need to be ever vigilant. Okay, so this brings us up to the last biblical topic for this episode, and that is just fiscal responsibility in general and how gambling can be irresponsible. So let's look at a few passages. Ecclesiastes 5:10. The one who loves silver is never satisfied with silver, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile. So when we chase after money, especially money that is gained through chance, we are often left unsatisfied and unfulfilled. This is the outcome of gambling in general. Most times we do not walk away with as much money as we arrived with, let alone any more money. We talked to Daniel and I both have had experiences where we've lost that money. And it is also true that if we simply continue to chase after money, we will never stop when we reach our initial goals, but continue and strive to gain more. There will never be enough, and that is why it is futile, because once you taste, the money, even if you, let's say you have $1 and you go, hey, I want to make $10 out of this dollar. And somehow you actually do make $10 out of that dollar. Do you think you're going to stop there? No. You've succeeded. You've won, and you've increased your wealth. And so you're going to go, yeah, now I want to take this $10 and make $100, and then 100 to 1,000, and so on and so forth. And we're just never, ever, ever going to be satisfied with whatever that amount of money is.
Yeah, there was one example of this kid who was betting in high school with a friend of his who was one of those like recruited bookies, and they quickly like made $1,000, and then before they knew it, they lost $1,000, and then were in the hole another $1,000.
Yeah, really quick.
Really quick.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at success stories, I would go as, you look at like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, right? Mm-hmm. The guy is oftentimes the most wealthy person in the world. I think it goes back and forth between him and Musk.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And this guy is rolling around in spaceships and the largest sailing yacht in the world. And you don't see Amazon stopping from their money-making efforts.
Oh, yeah, no. They're always like innovating.
Yeah, they're going to keep trying to make more money. Mm-hmm. That's just the way it is. The guy has everything he could possibly have in the world. There's nothing that he wants for, but he's not stopping.
Nope.
And I really believe this is the outcome of all people. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You're always going to want more. Doesn't matter. I actually hear a lot of Christians say, "Oh, if I only won the lottery, that would be it. I'd never won another dollar." And ever. Yeah, you would. Yes, you would. 1 Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and by craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. This is an often misquoted verse, but one that teaches a good lesson nonetheless. The love of money is not the root of all evil. So that's something we should probably clarify.
Yeah, it's the root of all kinds of evil.
Yeah, it is a root of all kinds of evil. We've already discussed several evils that accompany the love of money, things like addiction and greed and deception. But it's also frightening to consider that some even walk away from the eternal gift of salvation in Christ in their pursuit of money. And this is the greatest loss of all. If you are somebody who calls yourself a Christian and you are just chasing after money, that money at one point or at some point will succeed, I guess, your desire to serve Christ. Your desire for
overshadow it.
Yeah, it'll overshadow it. Yeah, your desire for money will overshadow your desire for Christ at some point, if that's where your heart is.
Man, that just sounds so bad. Like, literally something that is incomparable, like priceless, doesn't even define our salvation in God correctly. And then, like, you choose money over that.
Yeah, it's the pearl of great price, right? Yeah. It's this concept that you've found something that you're willing to sell everything you possibly have just to obtain it. That is salvation.
Yeah.
But if your heart is striving after money, then you don't see the value in that salvation, and you will throw it away. You'll just toss it.
Yeah.
So that's dangerous. That's very frightening. Matthew 6:19-21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy or where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And this passage highlights the futility of amassing wealth in this life, as well as the eternal benefit of amassing treasures in heaven. Wealth accumulated in this life is subject to corrosion, to destruction, and to theft. It is never guaranteed, and it can be very fleeting. I mean, just thinking about what Daniel said earlier about the fact that these people are gambling, with the concept that they may never even get paid out on a win. Mm-hmm. Is this very concept?
Yeah.
Wealth accumulated on the other hand for eternity is subject to none of these things. It is far better for us to chase after heavenly treasure and be satisfied in our hearts and minds with our eternal existence than to continue to chase after that which is temporary and ultimately disappointing. And then 1 Timothy 5:8, but if anybody does not provide for his own family, especially for his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. I bring this passage up because gambling can lead to destitution. We talked about it. How much money are they in debt, right? It went from that one, the very beginning kid, right? It was like $100, then it was like $3,000 and $8,000. It just kept growing and growing and growing.
Yeah.
The one, what was the other guy? $35,000 he stole from his company, and then now he's $700,000 in debt.
Well, it said he had lost $700,000. I don't know if that was all, like, he still owed it or not.
Oh yeah, but it's still a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And it leads to destitution.
It does.
So in gambling, the odds of winning are always in the favor of the house. And if you don't know what that means, it literally means that the odds are never in the player's favor.
Yeah, if you've ever heard the term "the house always wins," that's what that means.
Yeah, it's designed that way.
Yeah, it's designed that way. Like slot machines, for example, I feel like they are designed like when you first sit down to let you win a few.
Absolutely.
And then they just take all your money.
Absolutely.
The house always wins.
Yeah, and they have strategies to figure out if you're a new player at that seat. They know exactly who's sitting at those machines.
And even like this, just an example. I don't believe it's technically illegal to count cards in a casino. They just don't like it.
Yeah, it's frowned upon.
Then they are no longer at the advantage, so they kick you out.
Yes, they do. They kick you out. And it's crazy to think that they can even do that legally.
Right?
Yeah, but they can. You're right. If they catch you counting cards in a casino, in Vegas at least,
yeah,
you get kicked out. Because the odds are no longer in their favor.
Exactly.
Yeah. When somebody is addicted to gambling, they are playing a losing game, where it is far more likely for them to lose all of their money than it is to win more than they had. Even the occasional win, more often than not, comes at the expense of many attempts wherein the result is loss. This translates to lost wages for the household and affects all those who depend on the money to survive. So when a single person or even a few people lose all of their money to gambling so that they are no longer able to care for their families, they are worse than an unbeliever. And that is also just a sobering reality.
Yeah.
So that is my conclusion in regards to the overview of the biblical concepts of gambling. I just want to make it last statement that I do not believe gambling is in and of itself sinful. And if you do not have an addictive personality and are just, able to have disposable income where you can spend it on something entertaining and that's your entertainment of choice, feel free. I do believe that, if you have the means to just have disposable income, that maybe you should be, using that for better things than gambling.
Yeah.
But I also hear the argument that people, again, go see movies and go to expensive dinners and do whatever else they want with their disposable income. But there's probably always better things that we can do with extra money. Anyway, Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you.
Yeah, so I just want to go over some of the points that I hit on with our story for this episode. Since the Murphy decision, sports gambling has exploded in the United States, and minors have begun falling into very alarming betting habits. Some getting in thousands of dollars of debt before they even graduate high school. To combat this, states are just now beginning to implement gambling education into their school curriculums. And while I would not say that this is an immoral thing to do, I do feel that, and we touched on this in the episode, I do feel that Christians should not leave this issue to the state. We should be educating our children on the dangers associated with gambling, as well as the commands in Scripture to be wise with our money, seeking first God's kingdom, rather than a short-lived thrill. Did you have, you want to go over an overview of the biblical topics we discussed in this one, Brian?
Yeah, so just kind of a quick overview. We talked about addiction, how it is never good, whether we are addicted to substance, money, or even to the thrill of an activity. We are to strive to be mastered by nothing in accordance with Scripture. False testimony. We provide false testimony when we lie about our identity for selfish gain. In regards to stealing, it is bad, not only because it is against God's commandments, but also because it showcases the lack of love we have for each other. In regards to protecting children, children are a gift from God and parents, and to parents as well as to the church family, and we are to protect our children from the schemes of the enemy of the world. And then lastly, fiscal responsibility. Chasing after temporary money often leads to many griefs, struggles, and could be the thing that causes us to turn away from God altogether.
All right, so that is going to do it for this episode, but before we sign off, Brian and I, we do want to let you all know that we will be changing from posting an episode every Sunday to now posting one every other Sunday. We both really do enjoy making this podcast, but there's a lot of effort that goes into each episode. And so in order to allow each of us more time throughout the week to take care of everyday life events, we are going to be moving to an every other week posting schedule. I know a lot of you have told us that you really enjoy our episodes and you get sad like if we do like a shorter episode or something like that. So we just want to let you know we do appreciate all of you that listen. We understand that this may be a little disappointing, but it is a lot of effort, and Brian and I were both talking, and we need a little bit more time to take care of just everyday life issues. So as always, Brian and I thank you all for listening to this episode of the Bible Speaks podcast. We do ask that you send us suggestions for news stories to the Bible Speaks podcast at gmail.com, or you can send us questions, comments, concerns, encouragement, like whatever. We would love to hear from you. If you could leave reviews, share the episodes, and subscribe to the podcast, we would greatly appreciate it. We look forward to being back here with you all on the next episode. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.